Okay, let's dive in. If you picture global mission about a century ago, the Edinburgh Conference in 1910 really paints a picture, doesn't it?
It really does. You had, what, over 1,200 delegates?
Exactly. And almost all Western. I mean, the numbers from outside the West were tiny, like 9 Indians, 3 Chinese.
A handful, really. It definitely screams a particular kind of leadership structure.
Right. So the big takeaway kind of up front is that this old model, West-centric resources flowing one way, that's really shifting.
It has to shift. We're moving, or at least trying to move, towards something much more uh, distributed, more like a network.
And that brings us to this idea of polycentrism, right?
Exactly. Kirk Franklin's definition is helpful here. He talks about moving away from those traditional power centers.
So leadership kind of bubbles up from within different communities. They learn together, form their own centers.
Precisely. They become these self-regulating hubs of influence and activity. It's not top-down anymore.
I like how Andrew Walls puts it, the riches of 100 places learning from each other. That feels very interconnected.
It is. That's the beauty of it, Walls argues. It's not about one center holding all the cards.
Yeah.
It's these different hubs, these different perspectives, enriching the whole Christian movement. They need each other.
Okay, but there's a tension, isn't there? You mentioned the numbers. Christianity exploding in the global south.
Definitely. The demographic center has dramatically shifted southward and eastward.
But the money, historically at least, has stayed largely in the global north.
That's the historic imbalance, yes. Though even that is starting to see some changes slowly.
And Samuel Escobar, he really pushes back against that old model, doesn't he? The whole powerful bringing good news to the powerless idea.
He does. He warns against both imperialism, obviously, but also a kind of provincialism, a narrow view from any single perspective, really.
Okay. So our mission for this deep dive, then, is to explore this shift, this move towards polycentric partnership based on the material we've looked at.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to really grasp what genuine partnership looks like, that mutual give and take, I think we actually need to start with theology, with the Trinity. Surprisingly, perhaps.
The Trinity, how does that connect?
Well, think about Jürgen Moltmann's idea of perichoresis. It literally means dancing around.
Dancing around. Okay.
It describes the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Spirit, as this incredibly interconnected community. He calls it community without uniformity, personality without individualism, and difference without division.
Community without uniformity, difference without division. That's powerful.
It is this divine dance, this mutual indwelling. It creates space for each person of the Trinity. They retain their distinct identities, but through love, through relationship.
And that leads to, you mentioned kenosis.
Right, kenosis, that self-emptying we read about in Philippians 2. Christ emptying himself. It's about making space for the other, not asserting dominance. It's a model for us.
So mission isn't about imposing our way, but about serving, learning alongside, emptying ourselves a bit.
Exactly. And this isn't just abstract stuff. It flows right down into how we should relate to each other as believers. Think of Jesus' prayer in John 17.
For unity among his disciples.
Yes, a unity that reflects the unity within God himself. So our partnership with each other, it's actually a reflection of our unity with God.
Michael Griffiths calls it the esteemed privilege of being junior partners with the Holy Trinity. I like that framing.
It reframes everything, doesn't it? And Paul in 1 Corinthians calls us God's fellow workers.
So it's not about equal power in a human sense, but a shared task grounded in the cross, that ultimate act of kenosis.
Precisely. It's inherently sacrificial, this partnership.
Yeah.
Totally different from the world's way of thinking, the whole win-win negotiation model.
And the New Testament word for this is koinonia, right? Which means more than just partnership in a business sense.
Oh, much more. As our sources point out, it's multidimensional. There's the vertical dimension, our shared life in Christ. And the horizontal, our shared task, like proclaiming the gospel. Philippians 1.5 often gets cited here.
But it goes deeper than just the task. It's about sharing life, isn't it?
Absolutely. Sharing burdens, joys, victories. Paul thanks the Philippians for sharing in his sufferings, his troubles. It's comprehensive.
That's a high bar for partnership.
It is. And let's be honest, living out that kind of koinonia globally, well, it's challenging. We all bring our cultural baggage, our histories.
Yeah. The sources mention the early church struggled too. Peter eating with Gentiles in Acts 11, that was controversial.
Hugely controversial.
Yeah.
It shows that sharing true fellowship across cultural lines didn't just happen automatically. It took intention and maybe some divine prodding.
And then you contrast that with the Antioch church example. They weren't the center like Jerusalem, right?
Not at all. They were seen as more on the periphery, perhaps, yet They're the ones sending aid to Jerusalem during a famine. Acts 11 again.
Wow. That completely flips the expected power dynamic, the weaker supporting the stronger in a sense.
It really makes you question those assumptions, doesn't it?
Mm.
It underlines the need for humility, respect, accepting gifts from unexpected places.
Yes.
Which ties into Paul in Romans 15, urging the strong to bear with the failings of the weak. Who were the weak there, likely?
Well, the source material suggests it might actually have been the Jewish Christians.
Really? Why weak?
Weak, perhaps not in faith, but maybe in their struggle to fully embrace the freedom Gentile believers had. They had this incredibly rich spiritual heritage, but maybe found it harder to adapt. Paul was urging the younger, perhaps more confident Gentile believers to be patient and supportive.
That's fascinating. So fast forward to today. The church grows massively in the global south, maybe declines in parts of the west. How should the global north view the global south now?
That is the question, isn't it? Are we still caught in old patterns, thinking of ourselves unconsciously as the strong or the senior partner?
It's easy to fall into that trap, I imagine.
Very easy. But our sources stress that God's resources are so much broader than just finances. Look at Antioch. The quote-unquote powerless brought vital resources.
Like what kinds of resources?
Incredible resilience under persecution, for one. Deep experience engaging with other major world faiths. A profound trust in God developed through poverty. Rich traditions of prayer and spirituality. The list goes on.
So real partnership means everyone brings what they have. We don't just focus on what someone lacks, especially financially.
Exactly. It's about valuing the diversity God has woven into his global church, not trying to make everyone fit a single, usually Western mold.
Which brings us back to Edinburgh 1910. That tone, evangelization of the world in this generation. It was ambitious, maybe a bit triumphalistic.
You could say that. And as Andrew Walls noted, there wasn't much expectation that non-Western leaders would contribute significantly to the how. It was very much a West leaves the rest mindset.
And while Western dominance was the historical reality then, things have changed so dramatically. Church growth, global economic shifting.
Fundamentally changed. Yet, Huayung's critique is sharp here. He says even with the demographic shift, the structures of power often remain in the North.
You mean denominations, mission agencies, publishing, funding?
All of it. And that lag, that disconnect between where the church is vibrant and where the control structures are, can distort how we see things, how we act.
And he also mentions a potential lack of confidence among some Southern leaders, maybe sticking too closely to Western models.
Yes, that's part of the complex dynamic. Sometimes an understandable loyalty, sometimes maybe a reluctance to innovate or critique, which is why Samuel Escobar's critique of managerial missiology, this focus on efficiency and structure above all, is such a necessary challenge for everyone.
Because the goal ultimately isn't efficient organizations, but reflecting that new humanity Christ created.
Exactly, a humanity that transcends race, language, nation. It's supranational.
So when you hear talk, maybe among some Chinese Christians, that this century's mission is theirs, an exclusively Asian task, that sounds like a red flag.
It does raise concerns. We celebrate the rise of mission from Asia, absolutely. But we have to be so careful not to just swap one form of triumphalism for another. Equating economic power or national identity with God's plan. That's repeating past mistakes.
So, back to Andrew Walls. Mission today is from anywhere to anywhere.
That captures it perfectly. It has to be multi-directional, north-south, south-north, south-south, east-west, and multi-centered, not just one HQ.
This anywhere to anywhere idea is powerful. And looking at the book of Acts, Luke's use of we, like in Acts 16.10, concluding that God had called us.
Yes. That us signifies active participation, shared discernment. They figured it out together. And that word concluded, symbibazu in Greek, it literally means to knit together or bring together.
Knit together. So it implies joint deliberation, a unified understanding.
Absolutely. A shared ownership. And think about that other word in Acts, homothumadon.
Meaning?
With one accord or with one mind. It pops up repeatedly, emphasizing the unity and inclusivity of this new community God was forming. Jews, Gentiles, everyone together.
Redefining we for today's mission landscape, though, that's a real practical challenge, isn't it?
It is. Eldon Porter makes a great point about flexibility being key, especially for traditional mission agencies.
Agencies used to sending people from similar backgrounds.
Right. He argues that truly partnership-friendly agencies need to focus on the core essentials of the faith and be really flexible on the secondary stuff, the cultural forms. Rigid structures struggle with genuine partnership.
And it seems like many majority world churches are already quite flexible, maybe leaner organizationally.
Often, yes. They might have simpler structures, maybe a more inherent tendency towards collaboration. They're often just getting on with mission in ways that make sense in their context.
Plus, local churches everywhere are getting involved directly in cross-cultural work now, aren't they?
Increasingly so.
Huh.
Partnering with a big Western agency isn't the only game in town anymore. Churches are connecting directly.
And technology must play a huge role in that.
Oh, massively. Our world is flattened. Communication is instant. You can build partnerships directly, bypassing old structures. It really messes with the old home and field categories.
Especially with global migration, diaspora communities, refugees.
Mm-hmm.
The field is often right next door.
Exactly. The lines are blurred. However, we do need to acknowledge the economic reality.
The north-south disparity is still significant.
It is. World Bank data shows that starkly. China's a major economic force, yes, but vast disparities remain, and money still equals a form of power and partnerships, whether we like it or not.
Which makes rethinking things like tent making even more important.
Very much so. It's fascinating, isn't it, that we don't read about Antioch financially supporting Paul and Barnabas on that first journey.
Unlike Philippi later, where Paul explicitly thanks them.
Right. Michael Griffiths talks about this self-supporting missionaries. He stresses accountability to the church, absolutely, but acknowledges people like Paul often supported themselves for practical reasons.
So the old Moravian model, self-supporting craftspeople doing mission, maybe that's increasingly relevant.
Especially as more workers mobilize from the majority world, where sending structures might be less developed financially. Paul's own example in Acts 20, working with his hands to support himself and his companions. That's a partnership model right there.
And tent making isn't just about money, or even just for creative access nations, though that's a huge factor.
No, it's more than that. It's a response to political climate sometimes, sure. But it's also just whole life discipleship in action, demonstrating faith integrated with work, even where the doors are wide open for traditional missionaries.
So mission agencies need to adapt to facilitate this, support these kinds of partnerships.
They really do. The old structures weren't always designed for it. And maybe we could even see, I don't know, joint business ventures.
Between workers from north, south, east, west, pooling resources.
Why not? Leverage financial capital from one place, technical skills from another, local networks from somewhere else. Learn from the business world about collaboration.
But underlying all these models and structures, it comes down to leadership, doesn't it?
Always. Power and control. They're huge barriers to real partnership. The Lausanne Congress in Cape Town really hammered this home.
The need for Christ-like leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Servant hearts, humility, integrity, purity, no greed, prayerfulness, dependence on the Spirit, deep love for people. That's the foundation.
And cultivating that kind of leadership globally raises some tough questions.
It really does. Like, will Western agencies truly see majority world leaders as equals? Genuinely.
And will they change their structures to be relevant, not just expect others to adapt?
That's a big one. And on the other side, can majority world leaders move past any inferiority complexes without swinging into reactive pride?
Can everyone humbly acknowledge what others bring? Can leaders from the South demonstrate accountability with resources entrusted to them?
Are we actually moving towards interdependence? Or just new dependencies? What does Christ-like leadership even look like in different cultures?
What about past hurts?
Yeah.
Cultural misunderstandings. Do we need open conversations about those?
Absolutely. And maybe the toughest question. Are we willing to let someone else set the agenda, choose the menu, even if it's outside our comfort zone?
It's a shared pilgrimage, then, nurturing these leaders everywhere.
It has to be. And the context for this is stark. Patrick Johnstone's data. Europe's Christian population shrinking significantly.
While Africa, Asia, Latin America see explosive evangelical growth.
Right. So this idea of re-evangelizing Europe, it's not just talk anymore.
But who's going to do it?
Well, Michael Green's point about the early church is key here. It wasn't master plans or big names. It was ordinary, nameless disciples just living out their faith.
And maybe the current situation in Europe with refugees, international students, that's a huge opportunity.
An unprecedented opportunity for first-time gospel encounters. Perhaps the Western Church's greatest contribution now is discipling these new believers, wherever they're from, knowing they'll likely return home.
And encouraging churches from Asia, Africa, Latin America to send workers to Europe to support their brothers and sisters there.
Yes. That's part of that everywhere to everywhere movement. Back to Griffiths. We're all junior partners with the Holy Spirit in what God is doing globally.
So it's not west to rest, not even just rest to west. It's all directions. And discipling faithful followers everywhere blesses everyone.
Exactly. And there's another crucial dimension we need to touch on, the supernatural.
How does that fit into partnership?
Well, our source material points out that for many in the majority world, coming to faith involves direct experiences of divine healing, power encounters, things the West has often become uncomfortable with or ignored.
The influence of rationalism, maybe?
Largely, yes. Robert Solomon argues this has really impacted Western pastoral care, often neglecting the spiritual dimension, the reality of the spirit world that's so understood in many non-Western cultures.
So modern science and rationalism kind of squeezed it out, even from some theology.
To a degree, yes. But this is where partnership becomes incredibly enriching. Christian scholars, West and majority world, can learn so much from each other here.
Like the work Langham Foundation does, nurturing majority world theologians.
Exactly. Publishing works like the African Bible Commentary. It brings vital perspectives into the global conversation. Paul Hebert talked about missionaries and leaders needing to be mediators in this global theologizing.
Helping cultures understand each other, bridging formal theology and lived faith.
Precisely. Moving towards what you might call a more than Western theology, where the whole body learns from all its parts.
Which feels essential given the challenges David Bosch identified. Secularism, this human-centered focus that faces everyone now, doesn't it?
It does. It faces the global church. So our response has to be united, proclaiming the gospel faithfully, relevantly, and that requires confidence in the Bible and reading it together.
Reading it together, allowing those voices that were maybe marginal before to bring fresh insights.
Yes, that collaborative reading can unlock new understanding, maybe even a new language for the gospel. David Smith talks about deep listening to the Bible, taking its context seriously, building hermeneutical bridges.
So it's about becoming an international hermeneutical community, understanding the Bible through multiple cultural lenses, checking our biases.
That's the goal, partnering to understand and apply the whole counsel of God, because our commitment is to the full gospel, and God intends for the church, in all its unity and diversity, to display His wisdom, even to the cosmic powers, as Ephesians 3 says.
Biblical partnership has cosmic implications. Wow.
It really does. It's part of God's grand plan.
Okay, so that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. As you've listened today, how might your own picture of partnership, your own understanding of mission, be stretched or challenged by considering all these different perspectives, this call for mutual learning across the whole global church?